I guess we can get started. Again, my name is Erica Myrick. I'm the Director of Membership Sales and Services for the North San Antonio Chamber. We partnered up with San Antonio Board of Realtors for a webinar series. This is their second episode, which I'm looking forward to. We want to thank San Antonio Board of Realtors again for partnering up with us to give more information to our members in the San Antonio business community. I am going to turn this over to our Government Affairs Chair, Rob Killen, because he's very familiar with the real estate legislative update that we will be hearing about in just a few moments. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Erica. I appreciate it. Thank you all so much for tuning in to this program. And I am so excited to have the honor of introducing our speaker this morning, Brett Bentley. We were just talking about this, but I don't think a day goes by when Brett and I aren't on a Zoom call. And I will tell you, over that last year, I've watched his beard grow from bigger, smaller, and it's trimmed today. But Brett is an amazing individual, a great advocate for the business community in San Antonio, and certainly for folks in the real estate development industry. We've enjoyed working with Brett. Now, Brett earned his undergraduate and master's degree just up the street in San Marcos at Texas State. From there, he went on to work in the legislature, the Capitol, for a couple of different representatives, then joined the Texas Association of Realtors before coming down to San Antonio a couple of years ago, where he currently serves the San Antonio Board of Realtors as their government affairs guru. The man knows everything about state and local politics. He knows where all the skeletons are buried. But Brett's defining characteristic, to my mind, is that he is an intelligent and effective and articulate advocate for the things that impact the industry. And when I say the industry, we're talking about real estate, talking about development, but the general business community. And these calls are on a near daily basis. We're talking to local officials about significant areas of policy that directly impact businesses and property owners. So, Brett, I want to thank you so much for presenting to our group today, and thank you for everything that you do for San Antonio.
Well, thank you, Rob and Erica, for the kind introductions. And first off, it's my pleasure. We're excited about this opportunity at SABOR to continue, hopefully, a long-term partnership and continue a relationship with the North Chamber. Certainly, our interests align and are very much in lockstep with the pro-business community, trying to maintain a strong business climate, not only here in the greater San Antonio area, but then also, most importantly, perhaps across the state of Texas. So I've got a presentation that I've put together. We're going to focus primarily, I think, on at the state level with obviously the legislative session that is ongoing at a rather monotonous pace. And I'll be honest with you all, there's been, for obvious reasons of last week's winter storm, some significant edits that needed to be made to this presentation as I started making it a few weeks ago. But we'll talk about the weatherization efforts that are now going to be made by our state and local leaders, and really focus specifically on how that's going to impact home ownership and really just the general business of real estate, because there is a specific component of that as well. So if you'll bear with me for just one second, I'll pull my my PowerPoint slide up here and we'll get going. So before we get into sort of the nitty gritty of the Texas legislative session, I did just want to provide sort of lay the foundation for the San Antonio Board of Realtors, their political advocacy efforts, the charge that we're leading over here, and again, we are real in lockstep with, I think, issues that the business community, the North Chamber, the interest there. Certainly, we advocate for and promote home ownership, trying to get those first-time home buyers to enter the real estate markets and go and make themselves accustomed to buying their first home. Certainly real estate investment, the promotion and the protection and the preservation of property rights, real property in and around San Antonio, and then also just the continuance of a strong business climate, as I mentioned earlier. We do that on a variety of levels. We have a grassroots operation here. We're a member-driven organization with well over 13,000 now, with a really healthy and strong real estate market. But we really believe in the relationships that we're trying to develop with elected officials at the local, state, and national level. And we think it's, who better than real estate experts or members themselves to help cultivate and maintain those relationships. Elected officials oftentimes, they don't want to listen to necessarily, lobbyists or those representing special interest groups. They want to hear from constituents, and we feel like our constituents, our members who reside in those elected officials' home districts, we try to position them in effective ways to deliver talking points. And I'll touch on at the end of the program, Realtor Day at the Texas Capitol. It's a biannual event that's in lockstep with the Texas legislative session that, again, we try to have members of our organization be on first name basis, have cell phone numbers with those elected officials, just as we as staff do, to be able to send, warm messages, birthday greetings, things of the like. We feel like that goes much further than just email communication and keeping things sort of business or corporate in sense, very much personal in nature. And we feel like that's a real effective and a way and beneficial way to preserve our issues and our interests at the state and local levels. Certainly, we're not naive to believe that this is all done with just common good characteristics. There is money in politics, and fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it. But we do have a political action committee known as TREPAC, the Texas Realtors Political Action Committee, that was recently rebranded from the Texas Association of Realtors Political Action Committee. Be reminded, this is a nonpartisan group. We are not Republican nor Democrat. We do not focus anything as best we can. I know certain times are, specifically right now with the political climate and the tensions that are running rampant, specifically in DC, that can be difficult to leave out social issues, but we try to wear our realtor hat, our business hat, whenever we are coming up and developing these relationships. We feel like as we have a candidate interview process is sort of the entry floorway into developing long-lasting relationships with elected officials, and we grade those individuals out specifically on realtor-related issues only, taxation, property rights, things of that nature, that we would hold them accountable and hold them to a standard 4 and 2. We do that obviously with political action committee dollars that are voluntary investments from members of our association. Beyond that, San Antonio Board of Realtors is one of 83 some odd local realtor associations across the state of Texas. We are the 4th largest board in the state and 17th largest in the actually entire country. We have what we consider political jurisdictions. Certainly, basically what that means is we have the opportunity to work with local cities and municipalities in 10 counties within our political jurisdiction. We monitor actively, and thankfully to the use of technology, we can comb through city council agendas, county commissioner court agendas, to make sure that there's no policy that could perhaps be harmful, again, to property rights or to the real estate industry in general. We try to make sure that we have at least working relationships in each of those counties, and are continuing to move that needle in that direction to make sure that we are truly the voice of real estate in and around South Texas. I mentioned the 10 counties. Within those 10 counties, there are 67 municipalities. While there is certainly enough meat on the bone for the city of San Antonio and Bexar County to deal with, there's also all these other areas that have consumers that real estate issues do impact, that our members reside in and do professional business in. So we certainly want to be mindful of those and protect those individuals and be a voice for those members and be able to mobilize if need be accordingly, if and when there was something that, again, could prove themselves to be problematic that came across a council agenda and potential vote on the dais. So now I've sort of laid the foundation. I want to just talk a little bit about obviously House and Senate committee assignments that were recently appointed. Some notable appointees: Phil Cortez, who's going to be chairing Urban Affairs; Barbara Gervin Hawkins is vice chairing Culture, Rec, and Tourism; and Leo Pacheco chairing Higher Education. Certainly not, I'm sure that the committee assignments increase as far as chairmanships go for the Bexar County delegation, but certainly those would be a few names to be reminded of in their leadership positions. And then in the Senate, we have Vice Chair Senator Jose Menendez. He's on local government, and Senator Donna Campbell is chairing Veteran Affairs. Certainly on the House side, you've seen more bipartisanship as far as vice and committee chairmanship goes. 21 Republicans and 13 Democrats are chairing the 34 House standing committees. You have not seen that on the Senate side necessarily as far as the bipartisanship goes for chairman committee leadership. For SABOR and our state association, Texas Realtors, from our perspective, of all those combined committees, we're really focused in on about 6 or 7, specifically business and industry, licensing and administrative procedures, natural resources, transportation, and probably of evermost importance because of last week, energy resources. So those are really, probably thankfully, we don't have to focus in on the 30 to 40 some odd House and Senate committees. Our issues are really tied to those 7 or 8, as I mentioned, and we'll get into some of those specific bills later on in the presentation. Bill tracking, we have a team both at the local and state level where we will actively monitor legislation. Thus far, there's been about 3,000 bills that have been filed in the session. I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation how there's been a little bit of a monotonous approach to the start of this session. In years past, they've really hit the ground running from the opening day, all the way through the finish line and into a special session potentially. Due to safety protocol regulations, obviously with the pandemic, they are going at a much more, I would say, deliberate pace as they try to figure out and balance sort of the what's in the best interest of the public, making sure that the electeds, but then also those who visit the people's capital, that they are protected when they are on the Capitol grounds. This number is a little slightly less than what we've seen in years past, anywhere from 500, even 1,000 off from year over year from 2019 and 2017. Typically in a session year, we would see anywhere between 6,000 and 7,000 bills. It's funny because I know elected officials are really quick to pull the trigger shortly after Super Tuesday in November, where they've got bills that they have been working on and perhaps that have already been drafted. And then as soon as that first day opens, November 9th, they are quick to make sure and get those bills in so they can sort of find themselves with a lower bill number. Some of the issues that we're going to touch on here today: mandatory sales price disclosure, tax on real estate services, homeowners associations, and eminent domain. Those are some of the key, I would say, 3 to 4 priority issues that our association is focused specifically on for the purposes of this legislative cycle session. However, there are a litany of others. We could go into property taxes, transportation, education, infrastructure. The list goes on and on. Real estate really does touch any and all aspects, but to not keep you here for 8 hours today, I've trimmed that list down significantly, but did just want to go into a few of those specific items. I do want to notate and reference the expected revenue shortfall that due to obviously the pandemic that has really ravaged the small business community as well as businesses across the state. There's been a large depreciation in sales tax revenue collection. State Comptroller Glenn Hager had come out with early estimates of a potential $5 to $6 billion revenue shortfall. Thankfully, from I think everyone's perspective, it's only estimated at about $1 billion. I say only, but it's certainly significantly less than what the previous estimates had called for. This is really important. Legislators have oftentimes become creative with how they like to generate new revenue, and certainly real estate is on their radar as far as a revenue source creator. And so we are mindful of that and actively monitoring that legislation as it perhaps could tap into the real estate industry to generate some new sales tax dollars, as we'll talk about potential tax on professional services, which our association would be adamantly against if it ever came up for a potential vote. I know there's been question with that $1 billion deficit by legislators on both sides. If not, then when ever would this constitute sort of dipping the feet into the rainy day fund, which has been bolstered up over time? Certainly, I think of how former speaker, one of San Antonio's own, Joe Strauss, who was really key on boosting the rainy day fund for perhaps a once in a generation pandemic. And so you wonder if certainly there will be talk and discussion and legislation that attempts to tap into that to offset again the deficit that the state is going to be facing. I included a link on there for those policy nerds out there that want to follow some of these bills along with us. Capital.taxes.gov is a great place to start, and you can reference. It's as simple as typing in HB or SB and enter the number in there, and you can kind of track it along the way of if it's been assigned to a committee yet, if it's been filed, and where in fact it's at in the sort of political and legislative process as we move forward in the springtime. So moving forward, Governor Abbott came out and what feels like his State of the State address was only 3 weeks ago. It feels like it was 3 years ago, but typically every legislative session year, he will identify a handful of what he considers emergency priority issues that he reserves sort of the first 60-day period by the Texas Constitution, reserves that those items for the governor can come out. He's identified those 5 or 6 items this go around for the real estate industry in particular of importance. Civil liability reform. This is really interesting. You know, reopening the economy, it's been tricky to say the least for an endeavor for local and state officials to try and balance the needs and the wants of and rightfully so of the business community to make sure that they can open their doors safely, but also weigh the risk associated with that and perhaps putting workers in harm's way. I know Governor Abbott his intent is hopefully removing some of the business liabilities that have been involved and decreasing that sort of wave of potential legal liabilities that would come to the business if and when perhaps an employee or worker came down with COVID or some other illness due to them having to come in to work. And so there's sort of that balancing act of weighing what's in the best interest of the economy versus what is in the best interest of public health. And so I know civil liability reform from a realtor perspective, we have a ton of brokerages from several hundred to 1,000 realtors to those of the mom and pop variety that only have 1 to 5 agents in office. We want to make sure that those brokerages are protected and with some of those legal liabilities as well as they go through the reform process this legislative session. Beyond that, expanded broadband internet, certainly we'll talk about the weatherization efforts. That is a universal issue. I think broadband infrastructure is also a universally hopefully adopted and accepted issue on both the right and the left. I don't think anyone would disagree. This pandemic has exacerbated the need for high-speed internet. There's really the conversation I think stems from access versus adoption. I think of rural parts of West Texas, of East Texas, of South Texas, who for reasons that they can't control, access is the issue. There's been estimates that over 500,000 people don't even have access to high-speed internet. The pandemic, internet is no longer just a luxury, right? I think of you having internet before March of 2020. It's to access things like Hulu and Netflix, some of the streaming services, to have your internet at home. But now, during the pandemic, we're in month 11. It has exacerbated, as I said, the need and the necessity for the work from home aspect, to have that, to be able to pay bills online, to be able to put your child through school, as several independent school districts have still yet to sort of go to and from in-person instruction learning. We've seen certainly reports in the news that you had school children who were driving to nearby Starbucks parking lots just to find a hotspot or a free usable Wi-Fi service for the day. That way they could, listen in on their high school curriculum for the day. So it's certainly access, but there's also the adoption side of it too, where there's about about 65% of the statewide population. There's nearly 2 to 3 million Texans who it's actually adoption, I think, of suburban inner cities right here in San Antonio, that adoption is too expensive. They can't get computers into the hands of school children because it's too costly, that there's not enough money out there to supply them with. So hopefully the governor, as I mentioned, has made this one of his emergency priorities. They want to make sure that the needs of Texans are taken care of as we continue to move forward with not necessarily an end in sight of this pandemic, as the work from home, the school from home concept is ever more the norm now, and will be that way from some time. Other emergency items. Municipal funding of law enforcement. Governor Abbott had come out and discussed potentially trying to penalize those local municipalities who reallocated funding from police departments and put it into other purposes, making it harder for them to perhaps bring in state sales tax revenue on a year-over-year basis. Be on the lookout for that legislation. Didn't go into specifics about election integrity. I'll sort of leave that up to people's imaginations, but I'm certain that there will be legislation filed from some legislators in regards to making sure that our elections are, do not have some of the scares perhaps that other electoral ballots or elections have seen in years past. And then bail bond reform, there were certainly instances in years past, and this was actually a bill that the governor had pushed for in 2019 that fell apart at the last minute on the House floor in regards to strengthening limitations for those violent offenders to get out on bond and perhaps necessitate something of making sure that they are not creating or committing an act while they're out on bail. So with that, I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation how there were some significant edits for obvious reasons that went into this presentation. Additional emergency items that Governor Abbott had mentioned at last week's press conference included reforming ERCOT. I'm sure for many Texans out there, they did not know the difference before last week of ERCOT versus EPCOT, the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, which was anything obviously but reliable, and then also the winterization of the Texas power system. Certainly the energy capital of the world, how did it lose power? There's a ton of unanswered questions right now as it relates to nuclear, solar, batteries, coal, natural gas, the integrated and seamless gas and power system, how it was just a complete failure. I think beyond that, though, was the ineptitude of communication from the local to the state level, completely caught people off guard, the rolling blackouts, etc. There was truly a failure, I think, at a variety of levels from last week. Most importantly, how can you get it right? I know they have started meeting today with the House and Senate have set up emergency House State Affairs and Energy Resources are doing a joint committee hearing where they're bringing in utility provider leadership as well as representatives from ERCOT to come in and answer a lot of those tough questions, because many Texans are still left to deal with now the aftermath, the consequences of having upwards of 4 days without power, and there's still several thousands that are now either without power or have water issues because of boiling water notices, things of the like. So the conversation now, certainly it's going to be technical in nature as it revolves around trip circuits and megawatts, frozen gas caps, and winterization of power structures. But certainly, I don't think any elected official is taking for granted. I've seen reports of anywhere of upwards of 48 individuals who may have lost their life as a result of last week. You could see an onslaught more than likely. We've already seen lawsuits that have been filed. There's this conversation of sovereign immunity that ERCOT, which is only, I think they're one of maybe the only group that has that sort of protection where they are insulated from any sort of lawsuit that could stand to change at the end of this year. So you could see some crippling lawsuits, very high dollar, that any large and small actors are going to be coming after them as a result of the catastrophe from last week. Those items, as I mentioned, the committee hearings from today, Federal disaster aid has been approved. President Biden, for more than 100 counties. FEMA, I know, has been directly involved. So those residents out there who need the help to financially be made whole as a result of last week can reach out to do so with grant programs to get funding to make sure that consumers are getting back online. And as I mentioned, the question, I think, as it relates to housing specifically, is going to be, who bears the brunt of the energy bills? As we saw, natural gas and megawatts in the price of on our deregulated market skyrocket exorbitant amounts. We've already seen a $1 billion lawsuit at I believe it's Chambers County, Texas, where there was an auto draft fee. This individual racked up a $9,200 or $9,300 energy bill, and this local utility provider started auto drafting. They got, I think, upwards of $1,200 to $1,500 before the consumer was able to put a stop to it, and then turned around and actually filed a class action $1 billion lawsuit on behalf of all the consumers under this utility provider's grid. And so you're going to see, just I think, for the months and perhaps even years to come, things of this nature continue to play itself out. The implications here locally, we've seen Mayor Ron Nirenberg on Tuesday appointed a select committee for winter storm preparedness and response. It's going to be chaired by former Councilman Reed Williams, Adriana Roca Garcia, Ana Sandoval, Clayton Perry, and Manny Pelaez are also of note, who are serving on this private citizen and city council combined joint committee. Obviously, there's going to be some limitations on sort of the regulatory control that this group is going to have, but they are certainly going to be asking a lot of questions as to what went wrong, how it went wrong, and holding some of those local leaders here in our community accountable for at least things that they could have controlled or perhaps done better as a result of last week. As CPS Energy continues to try and determine the total cost of the winter storm's impact, they are obviously withholding the winter storm charges as of now. They've taken down the Manage My Account portals on the system. If you're like myself, I was quick to go on there and see, as an auto pay feature, was my utility bill still going to be there? What was it? Were there charges that were reflective? So in the next week or two, we should have a little more clarification on what that financial burden is going to be. Again, as San Antonio continues to deal with a housing affordability crisis, an affordable housing crisis, we've seen a month and a half's worth supply of inventory here, essentially meaning that if there were no new homes that came onto the market starting today, we'd only have about a month and a half worth of supply before there were no new homes up for sale within SABOR's MLS. It's a critical time as far as the supply goes. We're now seeing that the average home sold price is well over $300,000. But with that comes an increase in appraised values. Now, certainly, we're not sitting here and saying that anyone who purchases a home is looking for their home value to depreciate, right? Everyone is looking for that. But as the cost of home ownership continues to rise, as the property tax burden continues to become burdensome on those property owners, as now we have maintenance and fees and costs associated with plumbing repairs, you could have perhaps insurance rise with premium costs because of the insurmountable amount of claims that are now being filed, the largest ever for a non-hurricane related event in Texas. You start to combine all of these factors, and what is that going to mean? And now on top of that, you have your local utility provider who's going to have a tremendous amount of money. I can't even begin to estimate how much money they're going to be on the hook for. And where does that get passed off to? Is it off to the customer? I know early comments by Paula Gold-Williams were, we're going to maybe kick the can down the road, and perhaps over a 10 to 12 to 15 year period, we will build that into energy bill payments for customers. Local leaders, Mayor Nirenberg specifically, has come out and said, absolutely not. That is not something he is considering doing or approving, as City Council is the ultimate determiner for any rate structure or pay or decrease in your utility bills. So again, a lot of questions still to unpack as it relates to this energy crisis, and more specifically as it relates to the home ownership and the cost of living as it continues to outpace the rate of income here in San Antonio. Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick announced he had reserved 31 priority bills for legislation. The one I want to focus specifically on with regards to real estate is looking at restrictive covenants and how they still at times have racist language in there. We've seen Senator John Whitmire, House Representative Gene Wu have filed co-sponsored legislation in both the House and the Senate, looking at ways for there to make it easier for homeowners to remove this unconstitutional and unenforceable discriminatory language. What I mean by that is it'll have in the restrictive deed and the covenant, it'll say something like a particular race, Caucasians are the only ones who can purchase this property. It's unenforceable, but obviously, but it is highly offensive. And so we certainly look forward to working with the Lieutenant Governor's office and others on the House and Senate side to make sure that a lot of these provisions can be stripped and removed, because they're just unnecessary, but they are proven to be burdensome for homeowners who have to go out and actually get petitions in a lot of neighborhoods, upwards of 75%, depending on the neighborhood, to sign off on a petition and then have that submitted to a local court system. It takes time, it's burdensome to the homeowner, and it's something that should just be removed, certainly in 2021. I figured I'd plug redistricting. Lieutenant Governor and the governor had come out and said, hey, let's Capitol staff, elected officials, don't plan on taking any summer vacation this go around. It's not a matter of if there will be a special session, but perhaps how many. So we could be looking at, as census results continue to kind of start trickling in, and they're now holding committee hearings on the process. We could be looking at the end of summer at the earliest to when they start coming up with drawing of those congressional and state house and Senate district lines. Rough estimates right now could be anywhere from 3 to 4 congressional seats that Texas will be picking up. So be on the lookout in 2022 for sort of those ramifications in the primary and general election season for those new congressional districts as well. So now we'll focus a little bit more on the specifics of some of those real estate related items that our association is going to be focused on this legislative session. Sales price disclosure. We have adamantly been opposed to any sort of mandate from the state level of requiring property owners at the time of purchase to release the sold price information to a local or state governmental entity. We've seen efforts from central appraisal districts right here in our own backyard, but also all across Texas, where they will send out what we consider a nice little love letter at the time of purchase. It's considered a sales confirmation price survey. It looks very generic, and I would say government official on the surface. It's actually incredibly voluntary. We encourage our realtor members to let the consumers know, and everyone on this call, that you don't have to fill that out. We have continue to believe that sales price is not necessarily a good indicator of taxable value. There are seller concessions. I think of farm and land property where there could be agreements made between the buyer and the seller that do not necessarily that impact the price of the home, but not necessarily impact the taxable value on that home. It could pave the way essentially for a real estate transfer tax, which in 2015 there was a constitutional amendment against. So we certainly want to be mindful of that. We've seen efforts on both the Republican and Democrat side, House and Senate, in years past, and we're certainly to see that again this go around, who have filed bills to mandate that the requirement of sales price information be provided to governmental entities. If you start looking at it, I mean, we live in a political climate where the public demands an increased level of information and transparency, but certainly our organization wants to look out for the private consumer. We feel like government does not need information or access into a private transaction in this regard, as that is between a committed buyer and a committed seller, in agreement with them. And so we feel like the government has no bearing or should have no business in that information. Unfortunately, from our perspective, of the Texas legislature has consistently rejected these proposals. It has not made it out of a Senate or House committee as of yet. But again, as there continues to be a drive for new revenue, and I will tell you some of the considerations on those who would speak out saying we need this, they're complaining about a lack of disclosure causes sort of that systematic and dramatic over appraisal of properties, leading to the disproportionate taxing of sort of shifting or redirecting that tax burden to residential. We hear it in our conversations with the Bexar County Appraisal District, where because of the current system, they are forced to compare or pull comps with the JW Marriott, perhaps, and pull or compare it to the Holiday Inn downtown. They feel like that because of the differences or the inefficiencies with that tax threshold and comparison, that they have to pass that off to residential consumers. We hear them, but again, that is certainly not a lone reason to make sure that the price of sold data should just be sort of incrementally just put out there to the public for public consumption. Next up is homeowners associations, otherwise known as HOAs, every property owner's favorite bugaboo as they move into a new subdivision or neighborhood. If you poll
Hey, Brett. Sorry to interrupt. Can you hear me? Brett, you just lost sound. I don't know if Brett can hear me, but can you all hear me?
This is Rob. I can hear you. I just can't hear Brett.
Okay, I messaged Brett, but we'll see.
I hope that everyone on the panel is continuing to, on this participation is continuing to watch and attempt to read Brett's lips.
Yes, he's in the zone too.
He is going to keep going.
Okay, let me put my video back. I think it was brought to his attention.
Sorry, I apologize. Can y'all hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry about that. Technology-wise, I think has a way of. Yeah, I was just I had a fellow colleague come in and say you're muted. So there's your popular phrase of 2020 coming back. Apologies on that. So homeowners associations, again, tying a ribbon around this topic, it's certainly going to be something that I think due to the limitations on just the amount of time this legislative session, while it may not be something that is certainly a wholesale fix to the problem, we want to lay the groundwork for sessions to come on making sure that there's some change involved in HOAs across the state of Texas, and most importantly here in San Antonio. Sales taxes on real estate services. Again, as I mentioned, with the state comptroller's $1 billion revenue sales tax shortfall that the state faces now moving forward, there are going to be some ways, and we've seen legislation filed on sales tax on real estate services, and this is professional services in general. So CPAs, attorneys, Rob out there, be mindful of that. Elected officials are trying to come up with ways to generate some of that revenue and to bridge the divide in the amount of money that the state is now out as a result of the pandemic. Our association is steadfastly against any of these efforts. Ultimately, any of these standards or rules that would be passed on to the real estate transaction is going to be felt by the consumer, most importantly. As housing affordability continues to be an issue, we don't want to add more fees and dollars associated to a transaction. As of last year, the median home sold price of $265,000. There's rough estimates, if there were even a 1% commission sales tax fee associated with any sort of transaction, that could pass upwards of $20,000 in additional money at the closing table. So again, it would prove itself to be costly, even with interest rates at a near record low right now. We certainly don't want to provide sort of avenues of discouragement for those home buyers to enter the home buying market. Eminent domain is certainly another one. This is something that continues to play out in I think of West Texas and the Eagle Ford Shale, and South Texas as it relates to some of the drilling and oil pipeline construction. From our perspective, fair and just compensation, and also appropriate notice to the property owner. Most importantly, if there's notice, if there's fair market value that's given to the property owner, and if it serves a higher purpose, if it's for the public good, then we are okay. Where there's issue, and what we've seen at times, is the notice requirements are out of whack, but then also there is not fair market value compensation. There's not that lead time to find out and determine some of those answers to those questions, and provide the homeowner with the appropriate route to get out of that situation. Again, we continue to be mindful of that, and I think as more residents continue to come not only to the state of Texas but to San Antonio, eminent domain will continue to be a pressing issue and need of further education and information out there. I think several residents, they don't know anything about eminent domain unless obviously their property is going to be condemned, and then there starts sort of this process. And so I think having that set of stipulations and rules and procedures in there that make it easier for the consumer, for that property owner who would be impacted, to navigate and digest would prove itself to be beneficial for all involved. I would be remiss if we didn't touch on certainly efforts at the state level for rental relief as a part of the most recent coronavirus relief package passed by Congress in January. The TDHCA, the Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs, allocated $1.3 billion to rental relief available for landlords and tenants associated and who are going through difficult times right now. And this is for back rent upwards of the middle of March of 2020, which is also really critical. I know as we have several hundred property managers associated with our organization who are doing their best to make sure that tenants have a roof over their head, but they also need to be made whole as they are having to dip into 401ks and college tuition for students or for their kids, savings and other things, or just outright selling their investment property because it is just proving to be really difficult to be a small time mom and pop landlord or housing provider during this pandemic. Certainly the eviction moratorium, we have disagreements with that and its extension at the federal level and the CDC eviction moratoria. We certainly want to make sure that everyone is protected, but certainly want to make sure that there is not situations where we are picking winners and losers in any situation. So we are continuing to work with both state and local officials on on coming up with effective ways to most importantly not lead to displacement or homelessness for any of our state's residents, but also make sure that housing providers are not put out of business in 6 months because they have had to house and pay out of their own pocket for someone to reside in their property. It is a delicate balancing act, to say the least, as no one could envision, we would be in month 11 at this point of the pandemic. I do want to commend our local city council and their efforts. They were really proactive in the early onset of bolstering what was formerly known as the Risk Mitigation Fund and creating the Emergency Housing Assistance Program. They launched it. It was not without a few, I think, tweaks and hiccups, certainly because I think the need was just so great in our community. They have allocated upwards of over $100 million now to that fund to make sure that, again, residents can be put and kept in homes and not kicked out on the street by any means. They just this last week appropriated an additional $47 million into that program and also extended the length of time for certain eligible AMI levels of upwards of 9 months of rent relief. We're certainly going to be monitoring this situation on a week-to-week basis as they've extended that month duration time now, but it could also that those funds are also going to depreciate now because they've also extended the month. So it's a catch-22. We're hopeful that they can still continue to provide money into the providers' pockets to make sure that, again, tenants can stay adequately housed, particularly during, we still have cold weather and that we could be faced with in February and even in March. Texas has still been prone to freeze. So be on the lookout. And again, if you're a property manager out there, if you know of any who are in the business, we encourage them to start with the state level, but then also look in their own backyard and make sure that there is funding out there available, most importantly, if they need it, as they continue to provide the housing needs of several thousand across our community. I mentioned as I close here, our grassroots efforts involve meeting with elected officials on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis. We also like to get our members involved on a much larger capacity. In normal, non-pandemic related years, we would travel about 4 to 5 charter bus loads full of realtors and join 4,000 to 5,000 of our colleagues across the state and embark upon the Texas Capitol and meet with all of our Bexar County delegation on a one-day basis. And it's a really neat event. Obviously, for safety protocol standards, we did not do that. This go around, we're actually going to be hosting a virtual webinar with each of our Bexar County delegation on the House and Senate side. This is, I think the silver lining is it stinks that we can't be in person, but it also eliminates any issue of overlap. It's going to allow, I think, a little bit more of an efficient conversation to make sure that our talking points are delivered to those elected officials and that the needs of the real estate community, of the business community, are effectively delivered in a timely manner. Those are some of our key dates that we have coming up. We're excited about that opportunity. We're grateful that elected officials are still keeping, I would say, flexibility with their time and their willingness to still meet with a variety of groups, not just ours, as they go through a really unusual and unprecedented legislative cycle. With that, Erica and Rob, that concludes my presentation. I've dropped my direct contact information. That's also my cell phone number. Who doesn't work best than with text messages and phone calls? I know we're all inundated with emails from time to time, but again, as I mentioned, I just really greatly appreciate the opportunity to come and talk about a variety of these issues. Clearly, our cup is runneth over with a litany of items that we're monitoring, and the business community is no different. Elected officials, business and real estate, I think, go hand in hand, and so working in this endeavor together, we really appreciate the opportunity and look forward to the continued conversation in the months to come.
Thank you again, Brett. I'm going to again turn it over to Rob to see if he has any questions, comments.
Brett, oh, sorry about that. I turned off my video for some reason, but here I am. I'm back. Let's forget about that little cover on there to block the camera. All right, Brett, thank you so much for your presentation. Again, thank you for putting up a picture of you without the beard on that last so people can see what you look like pre-COVID. But there's a lot of information there. I think very, very helpful for the folks that are listening to this. We're recording it, and we'll be distributing it via, I don't know, GeoCities or something like that, some advanced platform. But really appreciate your comments and your focus on this. You'd mentioned the committee at the mayor's put together to look at energy issues. I had the pleasure of speaking with Reed Williams last night, who is chairing that, and he had lots of thoughts. Their first meeting is going to be next Friday. And Reed's comment to me was, make sure folks in the business community are watching that, are participating, and providing feedback to both Reed and to the council members and the other participants on that. So I think just follow up on that piece that you noted. Let's make sure that we're engaged with that process on the local level. But it's going to be an interesting session. Brett, you mentioned the special sessions. Uh, any thoughts based on what you're hearing in terms of how many special sessions and which ones will have special focus, which versus which ones are basically going to be the kind of catch up on all the stuff they couldn't cover during the regular session?
Yeah, I mean, certainly there's going to be at least one associated, I think, just specifically tied to redistricting. There could be more than one tied to redistricting, but I think the costliness of, I don't think people necessarily understand the overhaul that winterization and weatherization and how costly that's going to be associated with our infrastructure. I listened to the first hour of those committee hearings this morning and listening to utility providers talk about, and they're using, a ton of technical language that, I mean, even the common man is trying to pick up on. But I think being able to make sure that, our power plants, which were designed for, hurricanes and summer months, and had those protections built in there, because I know the question has been, well, heck, they do it in the Northeast. How here in Texas we get one freeze, we're not ready for this. I think the costliness associated with that. I think the amount of time that's even left in session right now. I mean, we're already at the first part of March, and we haven't even gotten into, they're mandated that they have to pass a House and Senate spending bill too, which they're required to do with the budget. So I think winterization of these service providers is going to be really critical, and I could envision easily that also being a special session just tied to that alone, because I think you have to pull apart everything, and then you start talking about, well, ERCOT, are they still going to be around? What is this sort of overarching system that we knew of and learned so much about this last week? What's that going to look like here in the months to come? Will be fascinating, but we will certainly not be tied just to 120 days this legislative session. I think we can all confidently say that.
Appreciate that. Again, thank you for your participation. We might have some other folks who have questions. I'm looking at the chat. I don't see anything. I know we've got, looks like we've got Donovan from Representative Lopez's office on there. He can tell us, the answers, right? But I do want to say this is a general statement, how much we do appreciate all of the folks who go up to Austin every 2 years, all the work they do between sessions. It's a lot of hard work. They don't get paid a whole lot of money to do it. They spend time away from their family and friends, and now they're trying to do this in a COVID environment and with a natural disaster for all intents and purposes last week. I have to, ironically enough, jump off this call to jump on another call about legislative issues with another organization. But Brett and I think Erica's still on here. Please continue to enjoy your discussion.
Thank you again, Rob.
Thanks, Rob. And Erica, I think just to Rob's point in regards to that special select committee that the mayor has set up, they are meeting this next Friday, and speaking with multiple council members, they're encouraging the public. I mean, they don't have all the questions that they want to come up with. I know they're really relying, I think, on groups like ours, on organizations like ours, but then also residents, so they can share those stories and ask a lot of those difficult questions to our local leaders to make sure that we get answers to them, and to make sure that, again, something like this, most importantly, never happens again. So I would just encourage, the North Chamber members to sort of compile those lists of questions and get those into the hands of those elected officials who serve on that special select committee, because I know they're clamoring for that information.
Thank you so much. We'll make sure we get that over. Rob does a great job of keeping our members informed with all that information. So
Absolutely.
yeah, thank you again for your presentation. Did we have any questions from anyone else? I think this might be it, Brett.
That's quite all right. Easy crowd this morning, but again, thank you for the opportunity, Erica, and we look forward to continuing the partnership with the North Chamber and its members moving forward.
Absolutely. Thank you again. We're so excited for our final episode as well. Yours was great information. The last episode of your series will be on pretty much the real estate address with our CEO and your CEO. So we will get that on our calendar for the spring, and we're looking forward to that. If you all need anything, you know who to reach.
Awesome.
Rob.
Sounds good.
No.
just direct all your inquiries to Rob. So.
Rob, yes. No. Thank you again, Brett.
Thanks, everybody. Y'all have a great rest of your day.
Yes, you too.